Otherwise, you're going to have like a kind of boom and bust model that plagues the solar industry. And we want to avoid that, let's say, for the storage industry as well, because you need to be able to put in place like recurring and diverse revenue streams for storage for it to make sense long term. We've even seen like in Australia, for example, they did have multiple different ancillary service products that was very much driven, let's say, by like a raw kind of demand from the market, to scale storage. But they didn't have any other revenue streams aside from these 8 ancillary service products. And this kind of created an overcapacity. It reduced revenue generation potential massively. And so then the energy grid operator had to kind of scramble to create some extra revenue streams. And they're kind of building out the long-term regulation market now for storage to be able to make it more sustainable, because they had this initial, let's say, gold rush of this, new shiny thing. Everyone's coming, but then it creates this overcapacity and reduces, revenue generation for ancillary services. So definitely policy needs to follow and build a long-term market and give opportunities for battery storage developers, solar and storage or wind and storage developers to make long-term revenue. Otherwise, it's just going to fall off a cliff after that initial gold rush comes in.
Yeah, so we're looking at kind of you have to think over well, in asset life cycles and life terms, don't you? Kind of 25 years, and then in the future, what are you going to do then? So Sim, I want to come to you, but I don't want to ask you the same question, because there's an interesting point about South Africa. We talk about the South African storage market, right? But if you look at it, it's almost three. So you've got standalone best procurement under BESIP. You've got storage embedded within REAP projects, and you've got these RMI 4P hybrid awards. And then on top of that, you've also got private developed wheeling linked installations. So my question to you is which of those four markets is growing the fastest, and are they competing for the same capital and the same developers?
Mm, mm. Sure. Very interesting question. And thanks for that question, Benji. Yeah, look, I think the one that was probably growing the fastest will be the private sector, purely because of pure economics and agility, right? And if you think about it, the REAP program or the BEST I4P program is sort of a structured window-based project that is not agile enough, all right? And it is standardized to certain areas. But if you look at the private IPPs, they're all over. They are backed by the corporate balance sheets, and there is a regulatory environment that allows them to be in place. So I would say the private is actually the leading. Having said that, though, I don't think we need to look at them as either or. I do think that we need to look at them in tandem as the bigger system working together. And your other question was, does it crowd developers or capital? Yes, to a certain extent, we have similar developers that are running this. However, if you look at the government-led procurement project, you find that there are few organizations or developers that are taking those projects, and then it leaves the other developers with the room to play in the private sector. So so there is that synergy between the two. And obviously, we do need the government-led project to actually make sure that there are skills and that there is certainty within the industry. With regarding capital, that's an interesting one. I do think that South Africa, in generally, as a country, we are blessed with the ability to attract capital. There isn't really a risk of them crowding one another in terms of capital. Certain capital, for example, we prefer long PPAs, which is 20 years and above, and they're able to attract that capital. So yeah, I think these markets can work well in the South African context together.
I see, and I kind of understand the kind of big centralized government-led procurement to provide a measure of stability, and then
Yes.
the kind of added demand from the wheeling side and the CNI side is providing the extra rather than the base rather than the anchor. But yeah, so thanks for that. And Matanda, I wanted to come back to you because it's a slightly different case in Zambia. So obviously Zambia's CNI sector is increasingly turning to self-generation to manage load shedding and cost exposure. But essentially, but the PPA environment for storage itself remains pretty unclear, and most deployments to date have been embedded in sort of solar plus storage systems rather than standalone storage. Is the current demand structure sufficient to support bankable standalone BESS projects without a dedicated government offtake mechanism?
That's a good question, Benji. So Zambia is really at its initial stages in terms of market development. I remember a few days ago we had similar discussions about storage, and purely what came out from the discussion is that we need some sort of market design. Earlier there was a talk, or somebody mentioned on this platform, concerning, obviously, when you look at markets like in the Europe, the batteries provide certain services, ancillary services, voltage regulation, frequency, and the like. Zambia is not yet at that stage, and we did indicate to government through the Ministry of Energy that in order for us to attract more investment, there's need to create or design a market for battery storage. And so what currently obviously is happening, like you indicated, is having solar plus base. We've had instances where a few companies around in Zambia have done some studies concerning BESS. I don't think I'm allowed really to mention some of those companies, but they're doing some studies just to ensure that they see whether this is really feasible. But obviously, from literature and what's happened, you can see that we are really far off, and there's need for government, private sector, and everyone involved to come in and design a market for Zambia. Not forgetting the grid as well. Obviously, we need infrastructure. We need proper infrastructure there. So there's a lot that's really happening at the moment, and I just hope that this will be resolved before 2030.
Yeah, and we had Zesco on yesterday who were saying that because there's no time differentiated tariff, it reduces the business case for solar. So I suppose that's for storage. Sorry. So I suppose that's one thing to look at from that point of view when creating that market. But it's also interesting that you were talking about the grid and so on and so forth, because Alyssa, I've been wanting to ask you. It came up briefly in some of the presentations and so on and so forth, but a handful of markets are essentially deploying storage specifically to defer transmission and distribution upgrades with documented capital savings over conventional build out. But this kind of practice remains quite niche because deferral value is technically hard to quantify. Most planning frameworks lack a mechanism to pay for it. separately from energy or ancillary services, but what needs to change for network operators to routinely consider storage alongside conventional grid investment rather than after it, as is the case at the moment?
Yeah, it's a great question and often a misunderstood thing because we're working in, let's say, old models of energy grids and old energy markets, and we have to kind of shift, what we're valuing and what we account for in a kind of renewable led energy market as well. I would say it's very much we have to shift. Yeah, what are we valuing? Are we valuing added capacity, which is the case now? And so these kind of deferral value becomes almost invisible because what is, it's like use a little analogy here. It's like you're a manager at McDonald's and you get a salary bonus if you hire more staff and use more food, stock. Whereas, if we kind of shift that model and you actually get a bonus if you can use less staff and less food stock to put out the same orders, right? So it's actually just kind of shifting in what we're valuing and we're placing, let's say, KPIs within the own grid operators. And I would say there has been some significant cases of this where you've seen really the value of adding more storage and how much this has saved governments. There's an example in New York, for example, in Brooklyn and Queens. There's growing energy demand. They needed to put in a new substation, which was estimated to be like 1.2 billion USD to put in this substation. And then they actually explored procuring, I think it was around 300 megawatts of storage, and then also procuring other efficiency measures and distributed storage programs. That cost them 200 million. And it was able to accomplish and solve the problem, right, that they were facing. So 1.2 billion to 200 million is a massive difference. And so there are really big opportunities to save grid operators a lot of money with storage. And I think that's probably when we talk to policymakers and grid operators across the world, they're scared to scale solar or wind or other renewable energy sources because they think that comes with big grid upgrades and like expensive. But done with storage and done with the right, market and regulatory frameworks, it can actually save massive amounts of money. So the money that you have to get for investing and providing, let's say, ancillary services funding for storage is much less than building $1 billion substation. So I would say there's massive opportunity. It's just about how we build in storage to procurement models and also how we value storage in grid operator models as well.
That's quite astounding. I didn't realize that the order of magnitude of cost saving was that high. But no, that's a really good example. So thanks for that. Just I want to ask one more question to Sin, and then I'll ask you for some closing thoughts because we've run over a little bit. But yeah, it was an interesting discussion. But Sin. Essentially, international certification bodies, they operate in South Africa, and SABS references IEC standards, but actual application of IEC 62933 and UL 9540 in BESIP and REAP procurement documents is, to be fair, it would be fair to call it inconsistent. And there's no dedicated domestic large format BESS testing infrastructure. Is the industry pushing for explicit standards and mandates in future bid windows, or is it relying on lenders and OEMs to enforce compliance through project finance and warranty conditions?
Yeah. You're correct. You're correct that the implementation of the standard is a little bit patchy, and obviously there's a context behind it, the fact that BESS is relatively new in the country, and generally standards and policies follow innovation. So that is the context. And currently, yes, we are relying on banks, on insurers, and OEM, warranties to actually make sure that these standards are upheld. Having said that, though, as Savia, we are starting a BESS working group, and precisely to answer this question, precisely to ensure that we are able to put in place standards and we're able to capacitate SAPS to be able to test and to be able to ensure that all the systems, not only do they comply with the grid, which is one of the requirements, but the standards are in place and enforced. So that's what we're doing in South Africa.
I'm glad to hear that SAPVIA is leading the charge on that. Having done work on standards with SAPVIA before, I know how good the team and the members are. So I have no doubt that it will be a good result. To kind of close now because we've gone over a little bit and that's my fault. Okay, I'm going to ask this question to all of you, but if each of you could change one thing that would do the most to accelerate bankable storage deployment in your market or globally, in Alyssa's case, what would it be? So, Matanda, I'll go to you first.
Well, for me, I think, let me say the political will is there. Standards are being implemented and place. For me, I think it's just the market design. That's what Zambia is really lacking. I know infrastructure can come along, but if we have the right market design, I think it will call a lot of investors and there'll be a quick move to deploy these assets. So that's what I would say. Market design is very critical at this point.
So an easy one then, design a whole market for storage. Alyssa, from your side, one thing.
Well, I would say from the get-go when building a market, make sure there's different revenue streams and market opportunities built in for battery storage installations from the get-go. So making sure, okay, ancillary services, great, but can they participate in the merchant market and capacity market, spot market? There's so many other ways that they can make revenue, and that's going to be key to de-risk and bring in private financing. So yes, making it an open market, or say creating different market pathways, let's say, for battery from the get-go.
Completely agree, and the experience from the UK shows quite how important that is. Yeah. So, Sim, on your side, one thing, what would you like to happen in South Africa?
One thing, I would
Yes.
say policy implementation.
Mm.
I think as South Africans, we are very good to draft very good policies, but sometimes in terms of the speed and the implementation of policies, we lack a little bit. So I do think that they are, if we could do that, it will certainly unlock BESS, including the policy around the market structure, moving away from the single buyer into, decentralized market. So if we are able to implement such policies with speed, this will certainly unlock BESS. Policies are there, they just need to be implemented.
Implementation. Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion. So I'd like to thank you all. Thank you to the wonderful speakers, Matanda Mwewa from SIAS, Alyssa Peck from GSC, Sim from SAPVIA, and I won't bother thanking myself. But yes, thank you all very much. And don't go anywhere because we have another fantastic panel for you focused even more deeply on the policy side coming up. So, in terms of regulation and policy landscape for storage in Africa, battery storage is no longer a future technology in Africa. It is being procured, co-located, and financed right now. But the regulatory frameworks governing it were mostly built for a different era. Single-purpose assets, vertically integrated utilities, predictable dispatchable generation. That gap between technology on the ground and the rules governing it is exactly what this session is about. So our panelists for this one come from four distinct vantage points: research and policy analysis, international standard setting, regional utility regulation, and national regulatory practice. That range is very, very deliberate. In the next hour, we will cover regulatory architecture, tariff design, private sector bankability, grid connection, and institutional capacity. And now the goal is not really to produce a single answer. Africa has 54 electricity markets, not one. But we can identify where progress is being made, what is holding others back, and what regulators and developers can realistically do next. So I would like to welcome the participants for this panel, Charlie Gatete, Director of Research from the African School of Regulation, Dr. Lusungu Ndovi, Training Lead for the Zambia Renewable Energy Association, Zarina, Nsebo Sefelane, Associate Professional for Energy Access and Renewable Energy Policy from the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Chembo Sichinga, Manager for Renewable Energy and Energy from the Energy Regulation Board of Zambia, and Silas Sanga, Manager Environment, Health and Safety from the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority of Kenya. So before we get into the discussion, I would like the fantastic panelists to make a quick presentation showing their work and their perspective on the policy and regulatory framework for storage across Africa. And to do that first, I would like to call on Charlie from African School of Regulation. Please do turn on your camera and your microphone, and please begin your presentation. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, very clearly.
Yes, thank you very much, Benjamin. First of all, I want to thank AFSIA for inviting the African School of Regulation to this sixth conference on storage solution. My presentation will focus on regulatory aspects of storage and to understand what is currently in terms of regulation done by different countries and what are the different risks and how regulators should consider to unlock the flexibility of the storage. Let me start by this. This first one is to show that storage. Okay, sorry. So, yeah, I think that's okay. But first clarification for this first slide is, of course, battery storage is something that is not only a kind of I have a problem with my screen. I can't see my screen again. Sorry.
Charlie, would you like me to share your presentation on my screen?
Let me redo, please. Let me stop and share it again.
We're seeing it very
Can you see
clearly.
now?
Yes. We can see it well on our side.
I see not possible to go. Please share the screen. I have a problem with my laptop. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry, Benjamin. Yeah.
Sharing now, and then there we go.
All right. I can see now. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about that. I was saying that, first of all, I want to provide this clarification, this obvious clarifications. Storage is a good access, is also a market resource, but as well is a consumer technology. And it is important in terms of regulation to define clearly what has been delivered by storage is not only the technical component. And regulator have to verify three things. First is to provide clarity in terms of classification of storage. That's the first. Second is to deal with how to pay for flexibility. You have to be explicitly. So it's not only energy components, but also to talk about how storage can contribute for capacity, for reserve, for ramping, for congestion. The third one is also regulated to create safe and bankable route for markets. That's define rule for to cover interconnection, procurement, and so on. Given that, let me explain that the most important and the objective of the regulator is to define how to maximize the system value while allocating risk to other parties that best able to manage them. So for that, there's three aspects. Let me go further on the different, each of them. Next slide, please. Regarding the first one, that is to classify storage clearly. Thank you. Is to say that depending on different, the kind of assets, the way we want to deal with that, we need to have to produce clear taxonomy of the storage. Whether we have standalone utility scale, yes, when we have hybrid renewable with storage, we have beyond the meter, CNI, we have also mini grid and off-grid storage. Depending on where you are talking about, we should classify and clearly define the service that is provided, because depending on that, we have a license process that is different, the tariff, net metering, the net billing, those aspects are different depending on how you consider that. So you have to classify that, and also the control right have to be clear. Next slide, please. That's the first one. Regarding the second one is to pay for flexibility explicitly. You know, Africa already have many enabler groups, but few storage-specific framework. You know, we are not starting from scratch. We are not starting for a blank page. Most countries regulate storage and directly through generation, through renewable, through mini-grid or net metering, or through market access instrument. So we have this table show an example of some countries with different regulatory instruments that deal with that. But you know, the key message here on this slide is to say that regulation can start now from clarifying how it's existing, what you already have in place, and how this can be applied to battery storage, how we can build storage-specific market and safety rule. So start what we already have and how we can improve that. Next slide, please. This slide, in fact, when we define what is existing and how we can improve that, we have to look for how we can match, because I was saying the important one is what the service that storage is providing, this is flexibility. How we can match the payment model to the service is providing. So this table present is kind of practical decision tool. Regulator have to look at first, what is the service need? Is it for system peak, film capacity? Is it to deal with ancillary service? Is it congestion relief? Is it CNI? Is it on mini grid or to provide regional reserve sharing? Based on that, you have to define what is the most appropriate regulatory payment method to address that. And then we have some illustrated examples that you can see that South Africa, as we said in the previous panel, are very advanced on that. So here is to say we should define based on the service what is the appropriate payment method, because we have to be well monetized. The service has to be well monetized. And here the battery is, we should not look at, you have to avoid a trap, is to pay only or to look at only the energy component. What is the exported kilowatt hour? But is to look at also is to look at what is the relevant service that is provided. What is the reserve? What is also the locational value that provide the storage? Next slide, please. The third one is to create a safe, bankable route for markets. And this is dependent of the approach. We have from self-production to market access to also regional flexibility. So depending on the stage where the country is, we have different markets, different regulations that can be implemented. You see on self-production, we have some regulation of Morocco, Egypt, net metering we use in terms of net metering, in terms of open access, in terms of regional flexibility. And something is interesting to observe here is what the West African power pools have already prepared some regulation regarding a very good project is undergoing actually in West African power pool. is to use storage as a backup, to use storage as a flexible tool in terms of regional power trade. So here, regulator should use market access rule to create place where storage can earn revenue. Revenue regarding self-consumption, revenue regarding film obligation, regarding balancing service, ancillary service, and so on. Next slide, please. Let now, after presenting the three important aspects that regulators have to work on, let me talk about now the main constraints that we are facing. There's four type of constraint. First is on legal ambiguity. You have to define clear classification and a clear licensing path. The second is the problem of missing price signal. So when you're looking only on energy tariff, not only components, you ignore the capacity, the reserve, the ramping, and the location value of storage. The third one is regarding bankability. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt you, but can you wrap up in the next minute or so?
All right, no problem. The third one is bankability, and you can see we have great readiness, safety, and consumer protection. And the last slide, please. Yes, I provided 5 moves that I think is very important for regulator is from classification of storage is to deal with payment, but we have payment have to be deal regarding different components, energy aspect, capacity aspect, availability aspect, and also ancillary service. Make sure that we have very good connection. Also work on the competitive procurement aspect and have finally safety, cybersecurity, environmental aspect. So let me stop here and look for discussion during the panel, the discussion session. Thank you so much, Benjamin, and thank you for.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for that excellent presentation. And I think it's a really great scene setter for this discussion. I'd like to call on the next presenter, please, Nsebo Sefalane. Can you turn on your camera and your mic? And I'm very happy to hand you over the floor.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. My name is Nsebo Sefalane, and I am from the International Renewable Energy Agency, and I am getting ahead of myself. I hope everybody can see my screen. If I could get just confirmation before I proceed.
It's looking good.
Okay, perfect. So my presentation today will be framed in the context of the work that IRENA does, which is sort of like a global and system level perspective on renewable energy transitions, power system planning, flexibility, as well as energy transitions finance. Now, for a bit of a background, IRENA is an intergovernmental agency that supports countries in advancing renewable energy and the broader energy transition. So we have 171 member states, some of which are African countries, and this gives us sort of like a broad overview of different power systems across more mature markets that are trying to sort of integrate higher shares of renewable energy to emerging and developing countries that might be working through different kinds of issues such as access, affordability, reliability, and sometimes investment constraints. Now, IRENA's work combines global and data analysis, as well as regional and advisory support, among many other things. Now, for this discussion, that perspective is very useful because storage should be assessed as one of the flexibility options within a wider power system toolkit. And so the central policy question is always what system problem is storage being asked to solve, and how is the service value being measured, and who pays for it. So within that framing, the presentation will begin by sort of outlining Africa's power system context, firstly, and then it will move on to cost signals, some of the investment patterns that we've observed over the years. We will touch a little bit on supply chains, and we'll end with some policy examples across different markets. And we will end the presentation with sort of like a decision framework, a policy framework, that we hope will be useful for regulators. So starting with the African context, this context is very important because the African power system enters a storage enters the African power system under very different conditions when compared with, the more mature markets, and even when you compare different countries within the continent itself. So the number that sits on the far left slide will be our starting point. So if we look at that first data point on installed electricity capacity, we notice that installed capacity remains concentrated in South Africa and North Africa, and many other countries still face, access challenges, reliability constraints, and underdeveloped transmission and distribution networks. And then the figure just next to it is on power outage. So when firms and businesses have reported these power interruptions, such as I think South Africa was very popular with the blackouts, storage then becomes relevant as a reliability asset. When we look at the access problem in it of itself, it adds another layer because we estimate that around 150 billion US dollars is needed to achieve universal electricity access within the next decade. And we know that there's several other initiatives that are sort of trying to chip away at that, access gap. One that has been popular in recent times is M300, which aims to connect 300 million people by 2030. So within that context, storage sort of competes with other urgent investment needs, which is the options of either grid extension, in installing distributed renewables that also come complementarily with storage, and many other issues. So the implication might be a lot more straightforward, which is the storage discussions to start with the system constraints. And in some places, the issue might be reliability. In other places, it might be an access issue. In other regions, it might be congestion, voltage support, supporting evening peaks, peak shaving, or just plain and simple renewable integration. And that leads us to the next slide. So once you have defined sort of like a system need, how should you then assess storage in terms of cost? So IRENA's cost analysis show that utility scale battery storage have fallen sharply since 2010. So currently we're looking at 192 US dollars per kilowatt hour, and that is a 93% decline since 2010. And the cost decline expands the range of use cases where storage may be feasible. So the key point that you would want to take away from this slide is that battery cost is just one system input. It's one input into a system cost decision. So storage still needs to be assessed against the cost and other performance of other options that can meet the same system need. So these can include other options or other alternatives, can be grid enforcement and interconnection. There can be various other alternatives, not just cost, not just battery storage. So for access context, the comparison may also include, comparing the value of grid storage in itself with things like grid extension. So the relevant metric there should be the full life cycle cost of delivering a defined service, which is either delivering the service reliably, efficiently, and all these other aspects, as opposed to looking at just the asset itself. So once we have sort of figured out what the cost would be, then we can move on to some of the numbers and that signal or show investment. So the next slide is on where sort of generally an investment is going. So storage, firstly, is part of a wider energy transition investment cycle. It is not a standalone investment category. According to some of the numbers that we get from BNF, we see that about 2.3 trillion US dollars in global energy transition in 2025 was led by transport, renewables, and grids, and storage reached 71 billion US dollars, which is significant, but it's still a relatively smaller pie of investment when you compare to other sectors such as transport, renewables, and also grid infrastructure. And also remember,
can I encourage you to start wrapping up, please?
Okay. I will try as much as possible. So the following slide shows a general investment figure. Maybe I'll move on to the next slide on supply chains. And I think the issue of supply chains is very relevant, especially in the African context, because we know that we are a resource rich continent, and some of the minerals that are used in the processing and extraction of or to produce battery come from Africa. So where do we capture that value? And then when we move and look at some of the examples across some of the regions in terms of policy frameworks, we see that there is a growing policy momentum in terms of battery storage, but also as mentioned, they come as a need. Different countries are putting in place different policy and regulatory frameworks based on what they have defined as their need. And then lastly is the decision framework, which did not put what the regulation need in terms of chronological order, but more so as a decision framework that can be tailored to each and every other country depending on a need. But the rule being you first have to establish what the need is, what the other alternatives can be in terms of, and how do they compare in terms of costs, and then what value it will, the value of storage would bring. Then after that, you can assess things like market readiness and work your way towards commercialization. I will, for the purpose of time, I will end here, and hopefully we will discuss some of the points in the presentation during the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, and I think it was a great overview, and it's incredibly valuable having the global perspective from Irina represented here. So thank you for that. Next, I'd like to go from the global to the national, and call on the next presenter, Silas Sanger from EPRA in Kenya. Silas, can you turn on your camera and your microphone, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Silas Sanga, working with EPRA. Allow me to share the presentation on the national and local regulations and standards that EPRA has been doing, specifically from the national level. So allow me to just put on the slide mode. Just a minute. Okay, thank you. Hope you can see my screen.
Yeah, can see it clearly.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. I would like to maybe start with, first of all, thank you, AFSIA Solar, for this opportunity. It's been an amazing opportunity to discuss aspects of solar storage in Africa and across the globe. But first of all, just for policy and regulatory perspective, Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, that is in Kenya, is charged with the regulation of the energy sector, specifically from the generation, transmission, and distribution. And more so when it comes to BESS development, what we currently do is licensing of BESS facilities. We've started with the development of a draft policy, which is going to guide on the BESS facilities that we want to do as a country. But maybe just to look at the overview of the energy sector, maybe from the Solar Photovoltaic Regulations 2012, you've seen a steady growth of the solar industry in our country, specifically from the workers and the contractors. We have also seen growth of solar facilities, both captive and also to the grid. And this comes to the background to the fact that the country is looking at BESS as an alternative, considering that we have renewable energy, which is close to 81% of the country. But of course, we have times which we are forced to use thermals, especially during the peak hours. But solar is a means of actually having the storage, which will be used as a means of stabilization of power. That is the energy mix, just for purposes of us to understand where we are coming from in terms of BESS. You can see we still have thermal at around 9%. Of course, 80% of this would ideally go from the renewable energy sources, geothermal, hydro, then we have wind, and we have solar at around 2.92%. So in terms of the capacity of the installed capacity, we are looking at aspects of solar and wind, which ideally would be used as for the BESS facilities that we have in the country. with a total of 540 megawatts of solar and 450 thereabout of wind. We see this as a potential for growth of BESS in our country. In terms of the peak demand, I think I mentioned that that is up to December 2025. Currently, as of today, we are starting at 2,445. That is the peak demand. And the peak demand is pushing us so much because at the end of the day, we have to start the thermals at around 6 p.m. To 10 p.m. thereabout. That is when the peak demand really goes high. And of course, because we're using thermal as at that point in time, we are looking at BESS because the prices of the cost of even doing BESS installations has come down drastically. And this is going to be used as a good replacement for that peak demand. Now, just looking at some of the projects that we are looking at, we have the Kengen, I think it was mentioned by Gatete. We have some projects which are ongoing, others have already started, others are in the project financing stage. But generally, we have close to 300 megawatts of electricity that we wish to do BESS. But of course, we have companies also doing wind throughout the country that they want to use BESS as a secondary storage because wind is quite unstable in our country, and therefore they look at BESS as an alternative. And then looking at the policy framework, I mentioned that we have currently developed the national BESS policy framework for the country, which is currently under review. But the primary objective of the policy looks to look at issues of grid support, renewable energy integration, emission reduction, and then in terms of cost efficiency, transparency, and fairness, and then standards and safety. This is also being done in conjunction with the Kenya standards for installation of BESS across the country. And we are looking at it so that we can be able to integrate with solar and wind into the electricity grid. Then, in terms of the application, this policy has looked at various aspects of application to it, because with BESS comes a lot of aspects, especially primary regulation, secondary regulation, and then the black start capability. In terms of the black starts, of course, during the evening, especially when you have blackouts, it could take lots of time for you to maybe put on maybe secondary source of power. But in terms of thermal, it took, of course, less compared to others. But when it comes to BESS technologies, we're looking at a response time of possibly 15 to 30 seconds. And that is what the regulation has and the standard and the policies have already mentioned too. Then in terms of voltage support, we're looking at ensuring that we provide reserve power at grid nodes for voltage control and management. And then at the end of the day, the time shift that includes the leveling and peak shaving. And then areas of collaboration, of course, as a country, in as much as we have done the policy, we are looking at areas of regulating BESS as a country. We have started licensing BESS facilities, especially for storage. And of course, because it's something that we want to ensure that it picks up very fast, we are looking at giving some incentives just to ensure that at least everyone that comes on board, especially for BESS technologies in the country, would have a preferential treatment when it comes to installation of BESS. And then the beauty about it is that in terms of costing, we are trying to run away from looking at a generation point of view, but looking at the service point of view. So we are looking at BESS as a service and not BESS just as a generation facility. And then in terms of licensing, again, we've also looked at aspects of ensuring that BESS facilities are primarily stored in areas which we are currently considering as off-grid stations. Of course, this would help to stabilize our grid in areas which are perceived to be having blackouts, especially during the peak hours and whatnot. But generally, I think as a country, we've given ourselves a target of, I think, until September this year so that we have the policy approved. But we are, of course, allowing BESS facilities to continue with operations as long as they meet the minimum safety and standards requirements. And then at the time of licensing, then we'll be able to ensure that they have been licensed at that point in time. I think that is just an overview of the policy that we have in place. And then we are also updating the grid code to ensure that it also considers the storage. The current grid code that we have is looking at the generation, transmission, and distribution, but it didn't quite capture the aspects of BESS. So it has also taken us back to the drawing board so that we can do the grid code. Of course, our grid code is interconnected regionally across East Africa community.
Silas,
And therefore, the grid code that you're looking will also.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Just a minute, yeah. Yeah, so we are looking at the grid code, which is going to ensure that the countries, especially the countries we import power from, maybe Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Uganda, would be able to ensure that the best facilities are factored in. So thank you very much for your time, and that is it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Silas, for that excellent overview of what is happening, of EPRA's work and what is happening with BESS in Kenya. Next, I would like to ask the second of our two national regulatory authorities to start their presentation. So Chembo from ERB, if you are here, please turn on your camera and your mic. And do let me know if you would like me to share my screen on your behalf.
Yes, please, you may share the screen.
Gotcha. And hop. There you go.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I'm visible or not. I think I have challenges with my screen. I don't know what's happened today.
Go ahead.
All right.
I can hear you crystal clear.
Awesome. All right. So greetings, everybody. My name is Chembo Sechinga, coming in from the Energy Regulation Board in Zambia. I'm coming in from the technical section, which is the Electricity and Renewable Energy Department. With me is a colleague who will support the discussion. She's coming in from the Economic Regulation Department. Her name is Lungowe. So I'll go straight into, we can go to the next slide. Okay, thank you so much. So our role as the Energy Regulation Board is to provide regulatory oversight on the energy sector, focusing on renewable energy, the conventional sources of energy, as well as petroleum. And so those are the thematic areas that we look out for. So going straight into the introduction, battery energy storage for us in Zambia has become quite a key technology to improve the electricity reliability, ensure the integration of renewable energy, and support the reduction on the country's heavy dependence on other sources of energy, in this case being hydropower. It also comes in to support the storage of excess energy to deliver the peak power during peak demand or outages, and also ensures the stabilization of grid frequency voltages, and also reducing the dependence on other sources of energy. We can go to the next slide. So our current regulatory framework basically is only shaping up with the development of standards that is currently in place. From about 2 years ago or so, we have seen a massive increase in the projects that are incorporating BESS within the country, projects which are yet to be actualized. But as it stands, and in order to be ready for the projects that are upcoming, we are in the process of developing a standard for the lithium-ion batteries the work is perceived to be concluded within this year. And specifically picking on lithium-ion batteries was, I think, what is more prevalent for us within the country. So we thought to pick on this type of battery for a start. A technical committee has been put in place with a number of committee members coming in from the various institutions, amongst which include the policymakers, regulators, academia, utility, industry players as well. And I'm glad to mention that the Solar Industry Association of Zambia is with us on board to help with the deliberations and coming up with this standard. We also, alongside, are proposing interventions that need actualizations, and amongst this is the development of a regulatory framework for BESS in Zambia. And not having this framework in place, of course, brings in a few challenges, because then how do you consider BESS? Is it a load? Is it a generation source? What are the governing licenses around it? The basic regulatory framework. What are we looking at? What standards are applicable, codes, guidelines? So this is the work that we're currently undertaking and work that is under discussion, not to forget the issues of tariff as well. But overall, the framework will consider technical, financial, regulatory, as well as social aspects. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, our framework will look at the classification of BESS, the market rules, the policy and strategic alignment, regulatory and legal framework. And specifically under the regulatory and legal framework, we want to look at the licensing requirements, the applicable standards, the applicable codes, as well as the guidelines that can actually be issued to would-be developers that are actually bringing in BESS. Can go to the next slide. Okay, so continuing on, we're also wanting to look at the safety and risk concerns, battery considerations, and environmental considerations, which specifically will look at the battery recycling, recovery, as well as disposal methods, generally hazardous material handling, the land use impacts, and obviously these are environmental concerns, land use approval, which comes in with battery usage, as well as community engagement benefits, and general community liaison, because ultimately it will have an impact on the environment as well. We can go to the next slide. So it's a very short slide looking at the time that was allocated to us. But in conclusion, I would like to mention that as we look at our regulatory framework for BESS as a country, we're looking at one that can actually provide legal clarity, ensure profitability, ensure reliability, optimize deployment, enhance investment, enhance participation, one that will ensure sustainability. Of course, we look at safety aspects as well. We ensure that there's prevention of accidents, and obviously ensure that there's an expansion in the market opportunities. So we'll obviously discuss more during the plenary, but for now, I wish to conclude and end right here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chembo, for that. And it's good to hear some of the thinking from the other side of the table, from what Saaz was presenting earlier. So thank you very much for that. And now moving on to our final presenter before we get into the panel discussion, Lusungu Ndovi from Zarena. I invite you to turn on your camera and your microphone, and I'm very happy to give you the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Lusungu Ndovi, as already introduced, coming to you from Zarena here in Zambia. And of course, I will share my short presentation, which basically is talking about the actual, just a moment, the topic of discussion today. Okay, so let's share that one. Okay. So I will go to slideshow and proceed. So basically, if you look at the discussion that has been today, this morning, you've heard the president of Solar Industry Association of Zambia talk about what is happening in the space. In Zambia, he's given good statistical background of what is happening, what is planned, and what will be. And of course, a few challenges here and there. So my discussion today, or my short presentation, is talking about accelerating renewable energy deployment in Zambia, looking at bankability, grid integration, BESS, as well as regulatory frameworks. So we're basically saying here that Zambia has successfully implemented scaling solar projects. For example, one is the Get Fit program. Here we're looking at good integration of foreign investment as well as local players being able to come up with a viable solar project. So renewable energy demand has continued to be on the increase due to economic growth. And of course, as be that the overdependence on hydroelectricity has been something that has awakened this solar race. And of course, we are now in a place where we can basically say we have solar being the main drive towards sustainability of the energy sector. However, we also look at the aspect of grid stability, which is a challenge. And of course, this has to come with solutions, and base is being considered as one of the critical infrastructures. So basically, if you look at the success story of Zambia, we're looking at solar tariffs having been deemed competitive, and of course, strong investor confidence coming on board. If you look at the number of investors, PPAs signed, you can see that there is indeed increased confidence in the sector. Then, of course, improved diversification, in this case, in terms of the hydro generation. Obviously, we are looking at having a foundation that has been created for future storage investments. So there are a few challenges, of course, as highlighted. And of course, some of these challenges are looking at foreign exchange as well as currency risks. And of course, limited storage infrastructure. Financing costs also remain high in large-scale projects. So I think I will not dwell much into the role of base. We've already appreciated that from the previous presenters, what is happening in South Africa, what is happening in other countries. And of course, we know the critical role that base plays in this sector. So when we're looking at bankability, which is one of the key points I wanted to highlight, we're looking at the introduction of regulation as highlighted by the ERB presenter. In this case, we're looking at allowing multiple streams of revenue by base operators. So as highlighted by President Matanda on the aspect of committees that have been formed, you're looking at base really being considered as a very, very important aspect of this solar space, in that new developments would need to have base as part of their their network in terms of what they are building. So we're looking at encouraging blended finance as well as concessional finance mechanisms, and of course, creating long-term energy storage agreements. When you talk about grid interconnection or grid integration, we're looking at having established technical standards. And of course, as was highlighted earlier, again, the committees in place are trying to look at these challenges and see how best grid integration challenges will be taken care of. Then, of course, we'd like to see improved coordination between developers as well as utilities, and have a strong network that plans for future renewable energy projects. So as I wrap up, I'm looking at policy and regulation. I think this has been highlighted, the net metering, open access, all these are good things that have happened in the Zambian energy space. And of course, this is promoting regional power market participation. Base and electricity markets, we're looking at supporting private off-takers, improving grid resilience, and of course, facilitating large-scale integration of base. Obviously, we're looking at establishing a national base deployment strategy, promote PP energy infrastructure in this space. And of course, in conclusion, I'll basically say Zambia, as highlighted, is interlinked and not landlocked, and therefore positioning ourselves to be a center of base energy development in the region. And of course, good collaboration with the ERB, ZESCO, and developers is essential. The future lies in integration of renewable energy, storage, and regional electricity markets. In summary, the next phase of Zambia's energy transition will not be solar-driven, but by successful integration of base, open electricity markets, supportive regulatory frameworks, as well as attracting investment while ensuring reliable, affordable power. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lusungu, for that excellent overview of what is happening in Zambia. So I'm going to jump to the I invite all of the participants to turn on their cameras and their microphones now. And apologies to the audience, but we're going to run over slightly. But I feel like there's a conversation that's worth having with all these participants in this particular format. So I hope you will forgive me for indulging in some of the expertise we have marshaled here today. But first of all, before I start answering my question, I can see Clever Gakwavu, who's the managing director of EUCL, the grid operator in Rwanda, has had their hand up for some time. I don't know, Clever, if you've got a question for our panelists or whether that's a legacy hand.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. I think I asked a question in the chat, and I got a bit of a link to be used, and I'll be okay to follow side discussions. I think those more of a rigor sound. Actually, I don't know how it was raised. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so in terms of a reminder to everyone, please put your questions in the Q&A section, and say who you want to address them to, and I will happily address them to those speakers. But to kick us off, so Nsebo, so as African grids kind of progress from low to higher shares of variable renewables, at what point does the regulatory focus need to shift from connection and procurement towards actively designing ancillary services markets, and what VRE penetration threshold makes that transition urgent?
I would first start by saying that we're not moving from anything, because I think a lot of these procurement is a mechanism that policymakers use a lot, and then also to expedite the market. So, for example, we cannot say we will move from the REIPPP. We can modify it, or we can sort of tailor it to suit the needs that we would want out of it, the outcomes that we would want. In terms of when ancillary services become very urgent, I would avoid giving one fixed threshold, because every power system is different. A small or weak grid may need flexibility much earlier than maybe a larger and stronger grid, but the shift should happen before the problems become visible. So once solar and wind start changing and how the grid is operated, for example, creating sharper peaks, curtailment or voltage issues, or higher reserve needs, then regulation has to move beyond simply connecting to and procuring renewables. So a useful policy message would be that at low levels of renewables, the focus is on connection and procurement. As renewables grow, the focus then expands to flexibility, reliability, and system operation.
I see. And then, I mean, that makes sense. You have to have something to regulate in order to regulate it. There's no point regulating a hypothetical, is there? So, Chembo, coming to you. So Zambia has obviously made significant progress on tariff reform through the multi-year tariff framework for 2023 to 2027. And the CFIP program now requires co-located BESS on new solar projects. But as that framework matures, is there scope to introduce time differentiated signals or capacity payment mechanisms that would specifically reward storage and flexibility? And how is EIB thinking about that as a next step?
Thanks a lot for that. So I'll call in my colleague, Lungowe, to come in.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Clear.
Okay. So our framework currently does actually allow for this. And when we approved our 2023 to 2027 tariffs, the maximum demand tariffs actually did have these time differentiated tariffs. So you had your peak charge, your standard charge, off-peak charge. But in terms of that type of methodology for retail customers, it's a bit difficult now that we don't have the smart meters installed. ZESCO is moving towards that, and they've started with their larger customers. So we may be seeing that more with the larger customers as time goes by, but it will take a while before that's installed essentially countrywide. But also with the introduction of open access, you see a lot of the developers that are coming in with solar. And so you expect that at some point they will need to get either back to ZESCO or to people that have battery storage to supplement their power when solar is off. And so I expect that in times like that, we'll be seeing more time differentiated tariffs around that.
No, thanks for that, and it's good to hear that Zambia is already has the framework for that. Because yeah, as Zesco was highlighting yesterday, it's difficult to make the economic case for battery storage if you don't have these time differentiated tariffs. But thank you for that clarification. And kind of sticking on Zambia and Zesco and everything like that, I want to speak to Lusungu. The grid connection processes remain a practical challenge for developers across many African markets. What would the private sector like to see from ERB in terms of standards, timelines, technical requirements, and where is the most potential for closer collaboration between developers, ZESCO, and ERB to make that process more predictable?
Thank you very much for the question. And indeed, following through what we said earlier, grid interconnection is very critical because obviously we are talking about solar energy. We are talking about now having base critical parameter critical aspect of this space. However, we have obviously been told, or we've heard about the limits that we can go in terms of having as much solar as possible on the grid due to certain constraints. So I believe we would like to see a well-established, clear, standardized, transparent grid interconnection procedures. Of course, we need to undergo what we're calling grid impact studies, which are done by private firms and, of course, certified by ZESCO. But, of course, we'd like to see more transparency, see exactly where we can connect, how much we can connect, and so on and so forth. If that information is made more easily accessible, then we know how to go about doing this work as developers and, of course, as EPCs. Then, of course, I'd like to basically see more collaboration between ERB, ZESCO, and the project developers because of a few bottlenecks that have been identified. But of course, the policies are good, but there are still a few challenges that are there. So we would like to see more collaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, and it's kind of an iterative process, isn't it? Nothing's perfect the first time round, and it's all about working together and working together to make it as good as it can possibly be. Which I suppose sort of draws me on to my next question. It's for you, Charlie. So when you look at regulators that have made meaningful progress on enabling flexibility, is there kind of an set of institutional characteristics that they share? And what factors tend to hold others back from moving beyond a compliance-focused role into active market facilitation?
Yeah, thank you, Benjamin, for the question. It is a very interesting question, but also a difficult one because most African countries are still at the early stage in developing the regulatory and institutional framework needed to enable flexibility. But that said, when we look at the few regulators that have made meaningful progress, they tend to share three important institutional characteristics. The first one is legal clarity. These regulators have a mandate that is clear enough to allow them to act even before the market is fully mature. A very good example is South Africa. It's very useful example show flexibility enable intervention, even if in the absence of fully liquid flexibility market as problem months. The second characteristic is specialized technical capacity. Proactive regulator understand that flexibility is not only commercial issues, it's also a system operation issue. It relates to dispatch, to reserve, to ramping, to congestion management, to grid stability, and so on. So without this technical capacity, regulators often default to basic compliance questions. They just ask simple questions like, is the license valid? Has this tariff been approved? And so on. Those questions are important, of course, but they are no longer sufficient for a power system increasingly shaped by variable renewable energy and distributed energy. So they need to go further than those simple questions, those simple emission. The third one, the third characteristic is the ability to use regulation to reduce transaction costs for market participants. For instance, in Nigeria, NERC adopted the AFU mini-grid tariff tool is a good example, for instance. And this tool was adopted to support cost-effective mini-grid tariffs to simplify permit application, to allow portfolio application across multiple sites. So this is an example to show that it's important to send an institutional signal. The regulator is not only a policy developer, it's also a standardizing processes. You have to standardize the process, and also you have to look at how to protect consumer and to preserve regulatory discipline. So for me, the key difference when we look at the different regulators, the key institutional difference is the institutional posture. We should think we have a compliance-focused regulator as whether existing rules are often followed. But a market facilitating regulator asks whether the existing rules are still fit for the system that is emerging. It's not only to look at it, it's to see how it fits, how it could be improved. So it is proactive posture that they should have. And that you observe for those who are very well in terms of developing the solar regulation. And this distinction is crucial. Moving from a compliance to facilitating require regulator to become architecture of the flexibility. It requires them to have clear rules for storage, clear rules for demand response, clear rules for distribution generation, clear for grid access, and so on. So to conclude, in my view, regulators that will enable flexibility most effectively are those that combine legal authority, also technical competencies, and facilitating mindset. They do not abandon the compliance role, the initial, no, they are just adding that with new assignment, new actions, but they go beyond that. So they use regulation not only to control the market, but they use also regulation to help create conditions under which new markets, new services, and new form of flexibility can emerge. And this is what we observe regarding those who have succeeded in their approach. I think that's all for mine. Thank you so much.
And that's incredibly comprehensive answer. And I think it's very, very clear those 3 points: the legal, the technical, and the mindset side of things. And that's certainly, I think, what we saw from ERB and EPRA in their presentations. They are thinking about this quite hard, and they are looking to put in place things that do enable this market to enable a kind of flexibility market. But which brings me on nicely to the next point, which is to Silas this time. So obviously, storage assets are flexible by design. They charge, discharge, and shift load in ways that do not map neatly onto compliance frameworks built for conventional generation. So kind of combining what Charlie was saying with the compliance role, how can EPRA use its surveillance and enforcement function as an enabler, building the operational insight and industry relationships needed to design smarter storage solutions from the ground up, rather than simply applying existing rules they were never written for?
Yep, thank you. Thank you for your question. It's an interesting question, and I wish to pick from where Charlie has really unbundled the aspects of a regulator and how a regulator can be enabled. I will answer this in twofold. The first fold is that we have the traditional approaches on how the regulator works, and also the enabling approaches for storage. Looking at where we've come from to where we are right now, we are trying to look at it in terms of, do we want to regulate the storage based on services, or do we want to regulate based on static, maybe asset categories? So as a regulator, one of the key functions, of course, of a regulator is policy and regulatory development. And in terms of the regulations that we develop for BASE, at the end of the day, we have to also look at what the stakeholders are saying. One of the key approaches which we've used over time, especially now that we have developed quite a lot of regulations in the past year or so, including the net metering regulations, which of course is capping C&I to 1 megawatt power. With those draft regulations, we are trying as much as possible to give the regulator an aspect to continuously collaborate with the industry. Because at the end of the day, regulation is not just about making the rules and enforcing them, but it is rather an industry-driven regulations. Over time, we have also focused on market development and system optimization. This again allows many industries, including the financing companies, financing corporations, to be able to come on board and be able to ensure that the regulation that we make are again working for them. In terms of, let me just speak about the second point, that is the National Power System Planning. We have also developed the National Energy Planning Regulations 2025, which has integrated storage of energy using BASE. And therefore, these are aimed at even ensuring that from the national planning to the county government's planning, way up down to the list of the bottom line of the pyramid. So this national energy planning is able to ensure that at the end of the day, you've also incorporated the aspects of storage. Then the working platforms, I think the industry has been one of the key drivers of the regulations that we have done. And over time, we've learned that public participation is the most important aspect when it comes to policy development and regulation. Maybe last but not least, we are also looking at aspects which will require the utilities now and the planners to evaluate, aspects such as integrated resource planning. We've also required them to have renewable energy programs, which will incorporate the BASE storage in them. We have also gone to the learning institutions, which at the moment we have 2 or 3 pilot projects which the schools are also doing. They're using solar, but of course the aspect of storage is what we are looking at. Looking at where we've come from and where we are going, we have also tried as much as possible to give the best storage so that we can optimize what we can be able to achieve. For instance, the issues of revenue stacking. We are also trying to, as much as possible, so that we can have a system which can provide frequency regulation. Maybe in the morning, you have arbitrage solar maybe at midday, and then you have a system which can provide peak support in the evening. And then at the same time, at night, maybe you can supply as a backup. So at the end of the day, when you do the revenue stacking, then you should be able to ensure that it's a win-win situation for both the country and also the developers. At the same time, you can be able to create markets for ancillary services. So it's something that comes to the point of how do we get this information? And this information can only be derived when we do meaningful stakeholder consultations alongside developing a very clear regulatory framework. I think I had the doctor mentioning that you have to have very clear regulatory framework. We have the aspects of technical standards and codes, which again borrows from the international standard best practices, and also the local National Bureau of Standards, which again has been very helpful. Last but not least, we have the aspects of grid code integration. In as much as we are trying to enforce all these rules and laws, we are trying to look at how can we incorporate the storage provisions into the national grid and system operations. Of course, we have gone to an era whereby we have unbundled the energy sector. I think we've just passed the regulations on market access and also the regulations on open market access and all that. So this enables every player to be able to be a distributor. At the same time, you can be able to be a generator. So a generation company can be able to do a distribution work. And of course, we have the wheeling charges which comes with it. So those regulations have come and the best technologies for storage has come at a very right time, because these are the regulations which are going to enable and all that. So I think, to me, I find that as the best way to do enforcement when it comes to this. But the key drive point in this is that let the regulations be industry driven and then implemented, of course, by the government. That is what I look at it in terms of, so that we can have a very unified way of ensuring that those regulations have been implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think that will be music to the ears of any developers on this call, and certainly echoes what Lusungu was saying earlier. I want to address, before we close up with your final thoughts, I want to address one more question to our Zambian colleagues from Edna Mtambo in the chat. The question is it correct to conclude that as it stands, Zambia does not have a regulatory framework for utility scale BESS projects? Therefore, is it safe to conclude that a standalone BESS project is not currently possible in Zambia? I will pass the floor to our ERB colleagues for that.
Thank you so much for that. No. This is actually the place to be. Please do come with your investment. As indicated earlier, we do have frameworks that are currently under development. So we don't have anything that is yet finalized, but we do have things that are actually in process. So we're considering all the technical issues, the financial issues, safety concerns, everything. But we can safely say that we are on track. So the framework that we're actually looking at is one that intends to be robust enough to accommodate various battery technologies, not only the ones that that are more abundant on the market, but we're looking at also being robust enough to accommodate any other that may come on board. And also, because I think we feel once that is done, then we will not have constant amendments to our regulatory tools and general regulatory framework. So this is where we are. I'm sure by the end of this year, we'll be able to give a different story. We should have something that should have been concluded already. So please come through. Zambia is ripe and waiting. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chembo, and I hope that answers your question. It's things are moving very, very fast in Zambia. So it would be foolish not to consider it. So in terms of closing up this, there's a thing that we haven't quite covered, and I would just like very, very brief thoughts from all of you on this. So what strikes me as a theme that comes up through our discussions at AFSIA with private sector and so on and so forth, there's a gap between what regulation permits on paper and what actually happens in practice. So I want to close with this question. If each of you could point to one concrete action, something a regulator could announce or begin tomorrow that would do more than anything else to give developers and investors confidence that storage is open for business in your market, what would it be? And I'd like to start with Charlie on this one.
Okay, thank you very much, Benjamin. In fact, storage solution is bringing a lot of opportunities in our African country and for our power system. And in my thought, it's important for regulator to consider, to change the mindset and to consider the opportunities that is bringing, and to make sure that the regulatory framework fits with the needs and the evolving of the technology, and why we need to change that. What are the regulations we need to change? We should start thinking about it. And we have a lot of best practice that we can observe and learn from and change regulation, because we need strong regulation, smooth regulation that can attract investment, and that also can allow battery storage to play its full role for the system. That's it.
Thanks, Charlie, and that's very, very concrete. So it's almost a shift of mindset rather than a concrete action. Lusungu, I'd like to come to you. One concrete action.
Okay, thank you very much. I would simply say, let us have predictable regulation. That predictable regulation should result in robust grid integration frameworks as well as market structures that attract private capital. And yeah, so basically predictable regulation, one word, and of course leading to those benefits of robust grid integration, affordable, reliable, and sustainable private capital coming on this. Thank you.
Sounds easy, but I in practice a lot trickier to achieve. But yes, predictable regulation is exactly what everyone should be aiming for. And Sebo, from your point of view.
I'm going on assumption that we already have a prerequisite in place, which is that the regulator has established a clear system need, meaning that the regulator knows what problem the storage is being asked to solve, whether it's peak demand, it's grid congestion, it's renewable curtailment, it's reliability, it's whatever it is, there's a clear established need. And then the next step would be, and this is my personal concrete action, would be for the regulator to just publish a clear storage roadmap and link it immediately to a procurement framework. The roadmap can answer a few basic questions, such as how the storage will be licensed, what services it will provide, who can procure those services, and etc. And I think that would send a very strong signal to market actors, to developers, to investors, because it will move the storage conversation from being theoretical to being more practical, especially for the players that are involved. So yeah, my answer would be announce the rules, define the service the system needs, and procure it.
So I think that's a very good answer, because it is something very, very practical. How do you move forward from having a framework to actually doing stuff? Chembo, from your side and ERB's side.
Okay, thanks. I think from my end, from the ERB's end, it would be an applicable and responsive regulatory framework. Yeah, just applicable and responsive. And of course, with that would come very clear permitting procedures, because we know where we get a few complaints or concerns. Is it the timelines? Is it reducing what timelines each institution holds in the permitting procedure? And by permitting, not only within the Energy Regulation Board, but all the players that are actually involved in ensuring that energy generators actually operate, in a comfortable environment. Yeah. So keywords, it's applicable and responsive for me.
I think that's a really good distinction to draw. I think particularly the responsive side of things. I mean, you see the globe over, permitting is always a bottleneck, but having that responsiveness is very, very key. So thank you for that. And last but by no means least, Silas, from your point of view, one thing.
Thank you. I will look at cost of doing business as one key thing that as a regulator would really attract investment into the country. And when we look at the cost of doing business, we are looking at the cost of the tariff itself. One of the things that investors would always ask is that how much am I getting if I invest in best technologies? What is the tariff? Is the return on investment going to be worth it, and all that? So let's have the regulations in place, yes. And then at the end of the day, we look at the cost of setting up best facilities in the country. And I think I'll borrow from what Chembo has mentioned in terms of licensing and enabling regulatory framework for such facilities to come. One of the questions we should be asking ourselves is, why would somebody set up a best facility in Zambia and maybe not in Kenya? And one of the key things that usually comes is the cost of doing business. And that is one of the things which possibly as regulators or even as government agencies, we can look at issues to do with having a very good taxation regime, maybe possibly zero rating some of the items that would ideally attract investment into the country. And to me, that would be one of the key takeaways that I would look at. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Silas. And I agree, the cost of business is hugely important. That brings us to the end of this panel discussion. So thank you so much to our wonderful speakers from today, Charlie Gatete from the African School of Regulation, Dr. Lusungu Ndovi from the Zambian Renewable Energy Association, and Sebo Tsefelane from IRENA, Chembo Sichinga from ERB in Zambia, and Silas Sanga from EPRA in Kenya. Now, very sadly, this actually brings us to the end of this year's edition of the e-conference on storage. Sorry, let me just share my screen quickly. Up. Yes. Yes, so sadly, this brings us to the end of this year's version of the e-conference on storage. Over the last 4 days, we've been through technological evolutions, project deployments, important conversations between key stakeholders, and the latest market intelligence and analysis. So thank you again to all of our fantastic panelists today and to all of those who joined us throughout the week. Thank you to our partners as well for making this event possible, and thank you to all of those that joined on Zoom, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you want to keep up with the rest of our activities, get access to exclusive market intelligence insights, and receive news from around the African solar community, get in contact with us via info@afsiasolar.com. That's info@afsiasolar.com, or visit our website at www.afsiasolar.com and subscribe to our newsletter. We will also be at Intersolar Munich in June, so please do come talk to us about all things solar and storage in Africa. We'd love to see you there. Thank you again, and we shall see you very soon. Goodbye, everyone.